In My Time of Dying by Sebastian Junger, dives into the raw and intricate realities of death, exploring the various ways it impacts individuals and societies. The book is a profound reflection on the human condition, using deeply personal stories and historical perspectives to explore mortality. Junger, known for his immersive storytelling, delves into the existential aspects of dying, bringing to light moments of revelation, tragedy, and the unifying inevitability of death. This summary will cover the key insights from the book, breaking down Junger's narrative and his exploration of humanity's complex relationship with death. Junger begins by setting the stage with a stark truth. Death is the one certainty that binds all of humanity. He reflects on how society, particularly in modern Western cultures, has developed mechanisms to distance itself from death. Yet, as Junger argues, this detachment leaves people unprepared for the profound emotional and existential impact of dying. In the past, death was something people confronted directly. Children were exposed to the realities of mortality from a young age, and rituals were deeply integrated into society to help people process grief and honor the dead. However, in the modern world, death has become medicalized, institutionalized, and distanced. Hospitals and care facilities have taken over the intimate responsibilities once handled by families, leading to a society where death is less visible, almost hidden from public view. This shift has had profound emotional and psychological effects, making death seem more foreign and frightening, and disconnecting people from the very process that once helped them prepare for it. One of the main threads throughout the book is the idea that, in today's world, many people die alone, removed from their families and communities. Junger explores the concept of communal death in traditional societies, where people died surrounded by loved ones, with rituals in place to honor and process the loss. In contrast, he argues, modern death is often cold and clinical, stripped of its sacredness. Junger uses the example of how World War II soldiers faced death together on the battlefield, finding solidarity in their shared mortality. This communal experience of dying, he notes, forged a unique kind of bond between soldiers that is almost non-existent in civilian life today. Junger recounts a poignant tale of a woman named Eleanor, a former school teacher who spent her final days isolated in a sterile hospital room, far removed from the warmth of family or the comfort of home. Eleanor had lived a life surrounded by children, educating and nurturing them for decades. Yet in her last moments, she found herself alone, surrounded by the hum of machines and the indifferent clinical environment of the hospital. The nurses, though kind, were strangers, and her family, due to strict hospital policies and their own discomfort with death, visited infrequently. Eleanor's loneliness in her final days was a stark contrast to the deathbed experiences of individuals in pre-modern societies, where the process of dying was communal and natural. Junger compares Eleanor's story to that of an elderly man named Yakov from a small rural village in Eastern Europe during the early 20th century. Yakov, in his final days, was surrounded by his family, friends, and neighbors. His death was a shared event, with people visiting regularly, bringing food, stories, and laughter to his bedside. The children of the village were not sheltered from the reality of death. They too came to say their goodbyes, learning that death was a part of life, rather than something to fear or avoid. Yakov's passing was not filled with the loneliness or fear that Eleanor experienced, but rather with a sense of closure, as he was comforted by the presence of his loved ones. Through these two contrasting tales, Junger highlights the emotional toll that modern, institutionalized death takes on individuals. The isolation that Eleanor experienced is a reflection of a society that has distanced itself from death, treating it as something to be hidden or managed behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Yakov's communal deathbed, filled with love and support, represents a way of dying that embraces humanity, connection, and acceptance. Junger's narrative serves as a powerful reminder that in distancing ourselves from death, we may have lost something deeply important: the opportunity for shared grieving, closure, and the comfort that comes from being surrounded by those we love in our final moments. Junger takes a philosophical turn as he delves into how different cultural traditions and belief systems address the concept of death. He highlights Stoicism and Buddhism, two philosophies that not only acknowledge death, but integrate its inevitability into the framework of living a meaningful life. These systems, he argues, provide individuals with psychological tools to confront mortality with calm acceptance, which in turn allows them to live more fully. In Stoicism, the idea of memento mori, remember that you will die, serves as a guiding principle. The Stoics, including Roman philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, believed that by keeping death in the forefront of their minds, individuals would not only be less afraid of it, but also more likely to live with purpose and virtue. For instance, Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that life was fleeting and that every action should reflect the values and integrity he wished to uphold. This mindset, Junger explains, helped ancient Roman warriors face death on the battlefield with courage, viewing it not as a tragedy, but as a natural end to a well-lived life. Instead of denying or fearing death, the Stoic approach encourages individuals to embrace it as an inevitable reality, which paradoxically frees them from the anxiety of dying. On the other hand, Buddhism approaches death with a focus on impermanence and detachment. Central to Buddhist teachings is the idea that all things, including life, are transient. This understanding, known as anicca, or impermanence, encourages practitioners to detach from worldly desires and ego-driven attachments, which are seen as the root of suffering. Junger refers to the practice of mindfulness meditation in Buddhist traditions, where individuals contemplate their own mortality to cultivate inner peace and equanimity. The Tibetan Buddhist Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, teaches that death is not an end, but a transition, a stage in the cycle of rebirth. By accepting death as part of life's natural cycle, Buddhists aim to release fear and suffering, achieving a state of liberation. This approach, Junger suggests, provides a framework for facing death with serenity, as seen in the lives of monks and practitioners who are known for their remarkable composure in the face of mortality. Both Stoicism and Buddhism share a common goal: to make peace with death, not through denial or avoidance, but through understanding and acceptance. For the Stoics, this meant living with integrity and moral purpose, knowing that death is always near. For Buddhists, it meant releasing attachment to the self and worldly possessions, recognizing that everything, including life, is transient. By weaving these ideas into his exploration of mortality, Junger illustrates how these ancient philosophies offer modern individuals a way to cope with the fear of death, and in doing so, live with greater clarity and purpose. Junger shares the deeply moving story of a terminally ill patient named David, whose journey from denial to acceptance of his impending death exemplifies the transformative power of embracing mortality. When David was first diagnosed with a terminal illness, his immediate reaction was one of fear and anger. He withdrew from his family, pushing away those who cared about him as he struggled with the terrifying realization of his own mortality. Junger describes how this isolation deepened his suffering, as the weight of denial made every moment more painful. His refusal to accept the inevitable created a wall between him and his loved ones, robbing him of the support and love that could have eased his final days. But everything began to change when David, through conversations with a compassionate hospice nurse, started to confront his fears and come to terms with his diagnosis. Instead of seeing death as an enemy, he began to understand it as a natural part of life. This shift in perspective allowed him to open up emotionally in ways he had previously resisted. Junger recounts how David made the conscious decision to use his remaining time to reconnect with his estranged family. He invited his children and grandchildren to visit him, sharing long overdue conversations and mending old wounds. In these moments, David found a sense of peace that had eluded him before. His acceptance of death didn't just alleviate his own emotional burden, it also brought a newfound closeness and healing to his family. Junger portrays these final weeks of David's life as profoundly meaningful, filled with moments of laughter, tears, and a deep sense of closure. David's acceptance of his fate turned what could have been a prolonged period of despair into a time of personal growth and reconnection. In his last days, instead of focusing on the fear of the unknown, David embraced the love and presence of those around him, leaving the world with a sense of completeness. This story illustrates Junger's broader point that by accepting death, individuals can transform their final moments into something deeply meaningful. It's a reminder that peace at the end of life is possible, not through resistance, but through the courage to face mortality head-on. Junger returns to the subject of war, a recurring theme in his work to illustrate how the proximity of death can create intense bonds between people. Drawing on his own experiences as a war correspondent, Junger explains how soldiers facing constant threats to their lives form deep connections with each other, connections that often surpass those formed in civilian life. He refers to these bonds as brotherhood, a concept that is, in many ways, a response to the shared experience of confronting death. The fear of death is mitigated by the presence of others who understand and share that fear, creating a sense of unity and purpose. Junger vividly recounts an intense moment during his time embedded with soldiers in Afghanistan's Korangal Valley, one of the most dangerous and hostile war zones in the world. He describes a specific night when the outpost came under heavy fire from Taliban forces. The soldiers, fully aware of the imminent danger, huddled together in their bunkers, bullets ripping through the air above them. In those moments, the fear of death was palpable. It wasn't just a distant possibility, but a real, terrifying presence that hung over every breath they took. What struck Junger most was the way the soldiers reacted. Instead of succumbing to panic or retreating into themselves, they leaned on each other for support, sharing quiet reassurances amidst the chaos. One soldier, a young man who had just received news of the birth of his first child, clutched a photo of his newborn daughter. He passed it around to his comrades, each of them taking a brief, almost reverent look at the picture. This small act of connection in the face of such intense danger helped to ground them. It reminded them of their shared humanity and of the lives they were fighting to protect. For a brief moment, the fear was eclipsed by this shared experience of life and hope, even in the shadow of death. Junger reflects on how these soldiers, despite their fear, found strength in their collective vulnerability. They weren't just facing death as individuals, they were facing it together, as a unit bound by a deep emotional and psychological connection. This bond gave them a kind of emotional resilience that allowed them to endure the trauma of war in ways that often elude people in more isolated, peaceful settings. Junger's account underscores his broader argument that facing death in community rather than alone creates a powerful sense of emotional fortitude. In these moments of crisis, where death feels so close, the soldiers weren't just surviving, they were finding meaning and comfort in each other, something that modern society's isolationism has largely stripped away. Junger delves into the lives of people who spend their entire existence pushing the idea of death as far away as possible. These individuals go to great lengths to create a sense of control, often by clinging to youth, wealth, and security as shields against mortality. They immerse themselves in consumerism, medical advancements, and a culture that celebrates eternal youth, all to maintain the illusion that death is a distant concern. For example, some may become obsessed with anti-aging treatments, fitness regimens, or alternative health strategies, believing that these efforts will somehow extend their lives indefinitely. Junger notes that while these behaviors may seem to offer control over life, they actually have the opposite effect, breeding anxiety and fear. The more these people try to deny death, the more the fear of it infiltrates their subconscious. Their efforts to push death out of their minds often lead to an inability to cope when the reality finally confronts them, whether through personal illness, the loss of loved ones, or other tragedies. When death does enter their lives, it arrives as a terrifying, incomprehensible event. Without having faced the inevitability of mortality head-on, they are left with an overwhelming sense of panic, regret, and often a loss of meaning. This avoidance, Junger argues, doesn't make life richer or longer. Instead, it strips life of its depth, disconnecting people from the natural cycles of existence and leaving them emotionally and spiritually unprepared for the end. He explains that by focusing so much on prolonging life at all costs, people miss the opportunity to prepare themselves emotionally for death. Instead of facing it with a sense of peace or acceptance, they are often blindsided, which exacerbates suffering. Junger believes that accepting death as an integral part of life can provide relief from this fear. He draws on both psychological studies and interviews with individuals who have come to terms with their mortality, showing that those who accept death tend to live with more clarity and purpose. They are less consumed by anxiety and are better able to appreciate the present moment. By acknowledging the inevitability of death, people can experience a richer, more meaningful existence, free from the constant burden of avoiding the inevitable. Aside from the essential acceptance of death, Junger offers practical suggestions and encouragement for living a fuller, more meaningful life. One key piece of advice is to focus on the present moment, truly embracing the here and now instead of obsessing over an uncertain future. This shift in perspective can help people live more consciously, appreciating the time they have instead of constantly worrying about prolonging it. Junger encourages readers to engage in meaningful relationships, invest in experiences rather than material possessions, and cultivate a mindset of gratitude. By doing so, individuals can enrich their lives and create memories that will remain valuable even as time marches on. Junger also emphasizes the importance of building emotional resilience. He suggests that people should confront their fears, not just of death, but of hardship, failure, and loss, through practices that foster inner strength, such as meditation, mindfulness, or even challenging physical activities. He draws parallels to Stoicism, where the focus is on cultivating an inner calm by understanding what is within our control and what is not. Buddhism, too, offers the practice of detachment from worldly desires and the acceptance of impermanence as a way to reduce suffering. Both philosophies, Junger notes, offer practical paths to reducing anxiety about death and finding peace in life's fleeting moments. In the end, Junger encourages readers to redefine what it means to live well. Rather than striving for immortality or eternal youth, he suggests aiming for a life filled with purpose, connection, and moments of genuine joy. By letting go of the futile pursuit of defying death, individuals can focus on what truly matters, living fully and leaving behind a legacy of love, kindness, and meaningful contribution. In conclusion, Sebastian Junger's In My Time of Dying is not just a book about death, it's a meditation on life, connection, and meaning. Through engaging storytelling, he weaves together history, philosophy, personal anecdotes, and psychological insights to provide readers with a deep and transformative exploration of death and its impact on humanity. The book leaves readers with a sense of clarity, understanding, and perhaps even hope as it reframes death not as an enemy, but as an essential part of what it means to be alive. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed the audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more book summaries that help you expand your mind. Drop a comment below to let us know which book you'd like us to explore next, and we'll consider it for our upcoming episodes. We look forward to bringing you more valuable content right here on Page by Page. Until next time, keep learning and growing.